Of our Classical America video series for AP World History. Let's move on to the region of Mesoamerica. This is roughly present-day Mexico. So Meso literally means middle. So the society that we're going to focus is the Society of Teochihuacan. So we can see where it's located here on the map. And then the next video is going to talk about the Mayan civilization, which existed southeast of that. So again, the Teotihuacan Society is located pretty closely to Mexico City, the present-day capital of Mexico. What we're going to see is that the Teotihuacan Society began to develop after the Olmec decline. So we talked about the Olmecs back in period 1. So future societies in Mesoamerica did adopt aspects of the Olmec economy, religion, and language. So we will see some similarities there. It would be a good connection for you to make if you're thinking about continuity and change for the AP exam. So the meaning of Teotihuacan is birthplace of the gods. So we can only concur or only assume from that there is a significant religious role in this society as well. The population at its peak numbered in the hundreds of thousands. So this means that it's really the largest city in the Western Hemisphere at that time. And this city also was laid out in a pretty organized grid pattern, and it did have multi-story apartments. So this suggests that it was well planned, it was well organized, and regulated by the government. It would definitely take some significant labor in order to construct a city like this. So the idea was that obviously it was very well organized and very well run at its peak. As far as looking at the gridded structure, you can see just from the photograph here that it is, that it is certainly well planned. That there's this sort of center of the city here, and obviously not all of the structures remain. The society also was surrounded by fields for agriculture, which we'll talk about in a moment here. But this aerial map also shows you that it was pretty well laid out and structured for its time. So the religion of Teotihuacan was very significant as well. There are many monuments throughout the city, which you can actually see many remains of them here, that were devoted to religion. There are a series of pyramids that existed in Teotihuacan, which again you just saw there. The Pyramid of the Sun, the Pyramid of the Moon, or Pyramid, good grief, Pyramid of the Moon. And you could compare that to the Moche Society that we talked about in the previous video. They very much are interested in natural forces with their gods. And then also the Temple of Quetzalcoatl, which we can see down here. And this is an artistic representation of Quetzalcoatl. He was a prominent god of the Teochihuacan Society. He was portrayed as a feathered serpent. Also, the main avenue of Teotihuacan was called the Avenue of the Dead. You can see that here, and also here on this map. This is the Avenue of the Dead. And it connected all the monuments together. Now, the priests and nobles were at the top of the social hierarchy in the Teotihuacan Society, which again shows us, first off, the significance of religion for the Teotihuacan Society, but it also shows us that there was some social stratification if there were nobles who were also at the top. And these people lived in the more extravagant homes in the societies, and then people that were of lower social stature, like peasants and artisans, lived in smaller apartments, and many of them lived in dwellings that had more than one unit. So think about it like an apartment building versus the wealthier people that lived in an entire building that they had to themselves. Their economy also was largely agriculturally based. I like this image here because it shows us the layout of fields that surrounded the hub of the city. There was pretty intensive agriculture to support a society of that size. Many of Teotihuacan's citizens were farmers and peasants, but you also had some considerable trade. Again, just like the Moche, who we talked about in the last video, their trade was largely regional. Part of this, again, is because there were geographical obstacles to make it very difficult for them to travel such a long distance and communicate. But still, we should not shortchange that because their trade network was quite significant, And also they traded luxury goods, which indicates to us that they certainly had wealth at their height. So one of their major exports was obsidian, which is this hard glass rock. You see two weapons that are carved out of obsidian here. They also made tools out of it. So this is something that is indigenous to that region, and it was exported. And we do see archaeological evidence to suggest that other societies got their obsidian from the Teotihuacan Society. This city also thrived on artisan workshops. So artisans did things like tan animal hides into leather. They made pottery, which we see represented down here. And they also carved tools out of obsidian and weapons out of obsidian, which again we can see here. So if there are artisans, we know that even though the Teotihuacan Society was significantly agricultural, they did produce enough of the agricultural surplus for some people to get into other lines of work. Lastly, Teotihuacan decline. Like a lot of the societies in the Americas, we are still experiencing historical disagreements about what precisely happened to cause them to collapse, which leads us to believe that it was a gradual phenomenon, unlike maybe a major event like a war or some sort of geographic or some sort of a weather calamity like an earthquake or tsunami or something like that. So the idea is that it probably slowly declined. Some of the suspicions that historians have, they do have some archaeological evidence that there was a large fire that destroyed quite a bit of the city. There's also evidence that the Toltec people invaded the Teotihuacan Society, and the Toltec people we can see lived quite close to Teotihuacan itself, so as they expanded, they invaded the society, and this fire actually, some archaeologists believe that the fire occurred when the Toltecs invaded them. Also, we have evidence to suggest that the society didn't completely collapse, that some of the people that lived in Teotihuacan simply left and ended up living amongst some of the other societies. For example, some of them relocated and settled into the Mayan civilization, which continued to prosper after the Teotihuacan Society collapsed. So that is our section on Mesoamerica. We will pick up with one final video on classical American civilizations, where we will talk about the Mayans. So stay tuned and thanks.